1. A summons from the darkness. Caretaker Thomas sat on the tower, watching the inky smoothness of the forest. The night air was cold, and only the occasional crackling of twigs broke the sepulchral silence. Suddenly the radio hissed. "Thomas," came the voice of the chief. "The cameras have picked up movement in the western sector. Check it out." Thomas sighed, grabbed his flashlight and climbed down. The ground beneath his boots creaked with frost. He didn't like these nighttime checks. Too often they ended in an unsettling emptiness. 2. The forest whispered. Darkness shrouded the trees. The flashlight revealed gaunt branches that looked like twisted arms. Thomas felt someone else's presence at his back. Suddenly there was a cracking sound in the distance, as if something heavy was breaking limbs. "Who's there?" he called hoarsely, but the echo returned only his fear. 3. Footprints and shadows. Footprints were visible on the frozen ground, but not animal tracks. They were outstretched, as if clawed paws were dragging a body. Thomas froze, his heart thundering in his chest. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered in a moment before darkness. He saw a shadow that moved unnaturally fast. 4. Presence. Thomas rushed away, but the forest was endless. Branches clung to his jacket, scraping his arms. Somewhere behind him, heavy breathing could be heard. He turned behind a trunk and saw it, a tall figure with broken limbs. Where there should be a face there was blackness, and in it, bottomless, shimmering eyes. The creature froze, but its smile was unnaturally wide. 5. Run if you can. Thomas screamed and tore away. But the creature moved soundlessly, as if it were darkness itself. The radio crackled. "Thomas, can you hear me? It's here." He wheezed. 6. Silence after the shout. The voice of the chief sounded again, full of alarm. "Thomas, call out. What did you see?" But the forest answered only with silence. And the tower from which he had left remained empty. Now only the lantern lay on the ground, blinking one last time before disappearing into the darkness. 1. Alina entered the house, slammed the door behind her, and froze. The air smelled of antiquity, dampness, and something else, subtle, unsettling. The house had been bought at a ridiculous price. The realtor had mentioned that it had been empty for a long time, but Alina hadn't paid much attention. The spacious rooms, creaky floors, and old furniture left behind by the previous owners gave the house character. 2. The first few days passed quietly. Alina unpacked, settling into the space. But on the third night, she was awakened by a sound, a rustle, somewhere downstairs. She listened. Quiet. Must be mice, she thought. But the next night, the sound came again. This time, a thud, as if something had fallen. The source was from the basement. 3. Alina found an old lantern, went down to the creaky door. The knob was as cold as ice. She turned it, and the hinges squealed as if in protest. The steps went down into darkness. The smell of dampness grew sharper, and something else, the smell of earth, of stale leaves, and iron. The lantern illuminated the walls, peeling from time. Along them stretched old shelves covered in dust, and suddenly, a sound, a rustling, as if someone was dragging something heavy. "Anybody here?" Alina's voice trembled. The answer was silence. 4. She took a step forward and froze. There was fresh earth on the floor, as if someone had been digging recently. Alina leaned over, and at that moment something rattled behind her. She turned around. The cellar door slammed shut on its own. The lantern flickered and went out. Darkness, heavy, pressing. Alina breathed heavily, trying to keep the panic at bay. She pulled out her phone. There was barely enough light to take a step forward, and that's when she heard it. 5. A whisper. Not intelligible, but insistent. Voices. They came straight from the ground. Alina stepped back, her foot bumping into something soft. She shined her light down. It was a doll, old, with a cracked face. On its chest in black paint was written one word: stop. 6. Her heart beat faster. Alina rushed to the door, but it wouldn't budge. Her fingernails scraped against the wood. The air became thick and sticky. Suddenly the ground beneath her feet stirred. It was as if something was crawling from below. A hand emerged from the ground, thin, with blackened nails. It reached for Alina. Alina screamed, recoiled, but another hand grabbed her ankle from the darkness. Help, wheezed a voice from beneath the ground. Don't let them. The voice was cut short by a groan, and the ground closed in, pulling her hand back in. 7. The cellar door suddenly swung open. Alina, panting, ran upstairs and slammed it shut. She stood leaning against the door, her heart pounding in her chest. And then she saw it. On the floor, right in front of her, stood the same doll. But the writing had changed. They're coming.